Hello and welcome to another episode of FEA's My Facility podcast, where we dive into the latest innovations, trends, and solutions in facilities planning and management. We will bring you conversations with industry experts, innovators, and thought leaders to help you navigate the challenges and opportunities in managing your facilities. At FEA, we're committed to building excellence where we live, work, and play. So if you're looking to stay ahead of the curve and improve your asset management strategy or facility financial planning, you're in the right place. So let's jump in and unlock the secrets to smarter facility planning in today's episode.
Hi, Adam. Thank you for joining us today and joining our podcast.
Good morning.
It's nice to see you again. We worked together a few years ago on a strategic planning, maintenance kind of planning for your organization. So nice to see you again.
Yeah, you as well.
How about if we start off by you telling us a little bit about yourself and your career and how you got to where you are now?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. First off, thanks again for having me on the podcast today. It's a pleasure to be with you. Adam Blackmore, I'm the Director of Parks, Rec, and Open Space for the City of Louisville, Colorado, spelled like Louisville, pronounced Louisville. Gets confusing for a number of phone calls asking for services and what's going on with programs, and it takes me a second to realize that they're probably talking about something in Kentucky with some of those phone calls. But we are out here in beautiful Colorado, kind of Boulder metro area, just east of Boulder, just northwest of Denver. Community of 20,000 people with a very robust parks, open space, and recreation and golf offering in the community. And I've been here about 3.5 years now in this position. I've been in Colorado for about 5 years. I came out here to be the director of a small recreation and park district called Prospect Recreation and Park District in Jefferson County, Colorado. Did that for a couple of years before transitioning back over into the municipal government world. I've been in parks and recreation as a profession in one form or fashion for a little over 20 years now. A large chunk of that career was spent in Henderson, Nevada, where I worked my way up out there from a rec manager into a superintendent role. Did that for about 10 years before coming out to Colorado. And then a little bit before that, I spent some time in the private sector managing indoor water resorts, of all things. It was now defunct for the most part. There's still a couple of them left, but an attempt to be a competitor to Great Wolf Lodge of sorts called Cocoa Key Water Resort. So it was hotel and water resort management. And so I did that for a little over 3 years. So that was gave me some interesting insights and experience, especially with things like safety and customer service that I still hold near and dear to my profession today, back in the public sector. And I got my start in Parks and Rec in 2006, with the city of Plainfield, or town of Plainfield, Indiana, where I had no intention of getting into Parks and Rec. I was going to graduate school at Indiana State University and did an internship in their Parks and Rec department in Plainfield, and I parlayed into a full-time job and in some form or fashion working in the service industry or the public sector industry ever since. I grew up in middle of Missouri, a little town with 300 people in it, Cairo, Missouri. And ended up leaving there to go play baseball in college, and got my undergraduate degree from Missouri Western State University in recreation administration. I went straight from there into grad school and all the other experiences I outlined. So that's a little bit about me and how I got to where I am.
That's cool. I didn't know all that background. What were you getting your graduate degree in?
I got it in sports management, but it was
Okay.
with an emphasis in sports marketing. So and administration. So the goal was to stay in collegiate athletics. I was in Indiana to get close to the NCAA headquarters and a lot of collegiate options and professional teams there. So that was the original intent, was to go work in athletics in some form or fashion on that side of the house in college or professional. And that obviously is not the direction it ended up going, but it's all good and all worked out pretty well for me. So
Yeah, and we work a lot with all different kinds of folks who are in the facilities realm, and it's always a meandering path that brings them to facilities. It seems like no one starts out saying that's what they want to do, but once you start to dip your feet into it, you're like, I kind of like this. And
that's right. That's right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how you handle and work through strategic planning and maintenance with your parks and rec organization. We know that that can be a challenge sometimes to be able to do some of the long-term strategic planning while you're in the day-to-day focused on, running and maintaining all of these parks and assets. So how do you balance that daily maintenance sort of reactive needs with trying to get some long-term strategic planning done?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's kind of a challenge any administrator especially faces. I think to start with, ideally you have a strategic plan in place or a long range plan that aligns with the community's desires as it relates to standards and day-to-day maintenance best practices. I think it helps using a strong planning effort that's already in place and been adopted by elected officials to kind of reference the way that you set up your standards for your parks or your buildings or your investments, capital projects, that kind of stuff as you go through your budget process. That's been something that we've been transitioning to here in Louisville, especially my department, trying to formalize some of those planning efforts so that the community has been engaged and there's kind of an education on how standards and managing those day-to-day parts of your operation align directly with staffing levels and budget allocation and all of those kind of things. I do think that there is something to be said, being a good steward of the taxpayer dollar and a good public servant is having the ability to uh, pivot or be reactionary to your day-to-day maintenance needs. Obviously, if we have something that's a direct safety concern or something that's endangering the welfare of our parks or open space or any kind of our asset for that matter, and using those facilities that we need to address, then that becomes the priority. As it relates to everything else, we've used some strategic planning efforts that we might get into later in this discussion over the past 3 or 4 years by working with FEA and with Studio CPG to develop a general maintenance management plan, a GMMP, for our parks division specifically. We have 37 parks, 350 acres of maintained parkland. We also do all of the medians throughout town and a majority of the right-of-way landscaping as well, which it's a big load for a small department. So we really use that maintenance management plan and the tools that came out of that with things like how to better align asset management for efficiency and that kind of thing, but also using metrics to understand and educate our community and our elected officials that with the current budget allocation that we have and with the staffing level that we have based on our inventory, we are doing really, really well to provide an average level of service to every one of our assets that we have in that division. And the findings from that engagement and the review were that we're currently providing an above average level of service. And so that goes to the discussion of the sustainability, being able to continue to do that and asking more from less with our staffing level. And I think we have an eager to please group. We have a high performing group of leaders and frontline staff in our department that kind of help with that. But I think overall, to make a long answer short, I think it's finding a balance and educating your community and telling your story on what your priorities are, why they're your priorities, and aligning your day-to-day workloads and your week-to-week work plans with hopefully a way to integrate that into your longer strategic type of plans for what you're trying to accomplish for your community.
Yeah, I remember working on that, and we rely a lot on those standards, either the NRPA metrics and guidelines or those APA levels of service standards to help folks like yourself figure out just exactly what you said. How can we meet the needs, and how does that align with the number of people and resources budget that we have? And trying to get that alignment with within your organization is hard, but it's I can imagine it's even harder with the community to try to explain that level and where you're at and what you can do. And it sounds like is that some of the challenges that you face with, funding resources and and meeting community needs?
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. I also think there's an element of alignment, top to bottom, with your community and your elected officials, and the people that are going to be receiving some of those, kind of immediate calls to action from your community for various maintenance issues or trying to gain an understanding of why we do what we do. And so, I think that it's developing, at least at an administrative level, especially developing a good relationship with your city administrators, your elected officials, whatever your governing body is, to kind of align expectations, to inform a certain level of expertise for gaining that trust that if the concerns or that call to action go to your administrators or your elected officials, that they're able to have the trust in you as the operator, to take care of the issue, but also to be able to have the trust to tell the people looking for that immediate action, that we have a process in place and that the process is good, and that it's a all-encompassing kind of asset management strategy that eventually will lead to their concern being taken care of. And so I think it's a more of a holistic approach with a relationship building as much as it is asset management.
Yeah, and if I'm remembering correctly, you had just brought on an asset manager, someone to really focus in on that when we were working together. I'm curious how that worked out, and how you are using that asset management plan to really, maintain those assets
Mhm.
and maintain them for the long term.
Yeah, that's a great, good memory by you. We did, so right when I came on board, one of my first kind of charges from our city leadership at the time was to improve or at least formalize our asset management structure, for our parks and open space division, specifically with a focus on parks at the time. And so we latched on to our facilities maintenance division, and that in our city that's under our public works department, and latched onto their work order system, for lack of a better way to put it. And so we just within the last 18 months or so have rolled out, after mapping all 37 parks and all of our assets and all of our irrigation infrastructure and just the hundreds and hundreds of components that we maintain, and aligning, anticipated time involved with repair and renew and replace schedules and all of those kind of good things. We've just got that kind of off the ground, and true kind of past the trial and error format within the last 12 to 18 months. And it's going great. It is, we try to make it as efficient and as little cumbersome process as we can have for our staff, so that they're able to effectively use the tools that we put in place for them, and then we're able to then kind of evaluate the data from those tools to ensure that what we're expecting as it relates to timelines or lifespans or replacement needs or whatever else are going to be able to be followed over the next 3 to 4 budget cycles, as we continue to kind of use this data to drive a lot of where we're placing our resources. And so far, so good. I think that there's always ways to consider tweaking things or evaluating the data or, refining the inputs that we've created to help make it easier for our staff and to help make it easier to tell the story on how we do what we do and why we do it. And so it's still coming along. It's a work in progress, but it's been a wonderful addition to our toolbox and how we kind of tell our story to the community on all the things we're accomplishing, but also why certain things that they would like us to accomplish, maybe aren't happening as quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, that can be a really good asset to help you tell that story and build the case for the funding that you need. I think it feels like an extra added effort in a role like yours where the community plays such a significant role.
Yeah.
I'm curious how COVID influenced or shaped. I know when I moved out here in the middle or sort of beginning of COVID out to Colorado, and it was such an emphasis here on getting outside and being able to do these things that did that change how your community views your parks or resources that were needed?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think, that was, if there was any kind of positive that came out of the pandemic, I think industry wide, it was a realization of the level of essentialness that, the parks, recreation, open space, golf industries kind of provide to people's mental well-being, physical health, all of the above. In our world, and I think I'd heard this about either state parks or National Park Service about, during that time, it was being loved to death, as they say, because it did just the amount of use, whether, once we reopened playgrounds or even things like, trail systems, getting widened or vegetation damage on the outsides of the, standard 6 foot, 8 foot wide soft surface trail all of a sudden becomes 10 feet wide because people, when they're passing, are getting off trail. So, we're still actually doing some restoration efforts as it relates to the effects of that. But, that's a small price to pay for being able to have said that, that resource was there and valued and used. I will say that, especially we run one of our pristine and most valued community resources is our public golf course, and we run that in-house with our own staff. And golf is one of those businesses. We were doing 15 to 20,000 rounds a year pre-pandemic, and now that demand that grew during the pandemic has sustained, and we're still doing 40 to 50,000 rounds a year on that asset with relatively stagnant revenue growth. It's an enterprise fund, so we have to use what we make to pay for the upkeep of it. And it's, as we've gone along and kind of experienced the post-pandemic impacts on that facility with the high demand, that's taken some unique balancing. Our community's a little unique, and we were heavily impacted, obviously, by the Marshall Fire. And hundreds of homes were lost and people were displaced during that tragedy pretty quickly after, some of the pandemic restrictions started to come off. So it was kind of a double whammy for this community as we've kind of recovered from one thing straight into the next. But with that, that's led to, a renewed vigor for our recreation center and for the community assets, and kind of rebranding ourselves for people that are moving new into the community on lots that were purchased by new homeowners. We played a role in that with anybody that lost their home in the fire. We gave their free annual fitness memberships to the rec center to keep people engaged in the community, even if they were displaced to a different community during the time of rebuild. And so I think between the pandemic and the Marshall Fire, I think that our community has shown an immense amount of resiliency and their kind of fortitude to get through those two terrible instances, but at the same time, I think there's been an immense amount of gratitude and appreciation and use of our facilities that we have to be able to adjust and explain as we, some of our assets maybe depreciate faster, or there are calls for replacements a little bit quicker because people are using things more frequently, and the newness of them kind of wears out. So we work through our elected officials and our budgeting process to try to really align some of maybe those short-term improvements with those demands based on the impacts from COVID and from the Marshall Fire.
Yeah, I mean that definitely was a horrific event. I remember that day. I was moving our office. So the office that we had in Lakewood was on the third or fourth floor, and we could see the smoke that day, and just sort of remembering what's going on. And it was like 80-mile-an-hour winds, kind of craziness.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
it was horrific. We're coming up on the 5-year
yeah,
remembrance of that event next year. So
yeah. Are there other examples where strategic planning helped improve park services, or where that long-term perspective kind of changed how you manage your assets?
yeah, I think I'd use what we're doing right now. We're actually we've rebranded what was formerly known as a master plan. We're calling that 10-year long range plan, and we were overdue. The last one was 2012, and I think that for anybody listening to this that thinks that a long range 10 to 15-year plan is going to be some level of taken as gospel, if you will, for
Yeah,
what you're going to do. This community, within 2 years of the 2012 plan being adopted, underwent a horrific flood that completely wiped out our entire golf course and had to be rebuilt, and instead, millions of dollars worth of damage to the community. And so that puts what you think, your grand plan on hold. And then we mentioned COVID, and then you mentioned the Marshall Fire. Like, I think that it's just important to know that these documents are incredibly important, and strategic kind of thinking is important in the way that you're allocating your resources and what the community wants to see out of what you're able to offer. But also, I think just as important is the ability to kind of pivot when the community needs something else. And I'll give you an example. We're in the process of gaining approval for a contract to do the first standalone pickleball courts right now for Louisville residents. And that was a priority in 2012. And we're still referencing back to the adopted plan, noting that the community in 2012 really wanted that as part of their recreation amenities for what they were able to do in our community. So it's still a relevant plan. The engagement still stands as relevant,
yeah,
but also with the understanding that, in the blink of an eye, relatively speaking, your community priorities, your elected official priorities, it can shift, and you need to be able to have a plan that can shift with that, kind of an overarching like priorities and values and vision statement, but without being overly prescriptive, I think is a good way to go about it.
yeah, yeah. That's great. I'm glad you're getting in some pickleball. I'm a big pickleball and tennis player, so I'm always happy about that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I live in like the Sterling Ranch, Roxborough area now, and they put up brand new pickleball courts, and they put um, glass walls around it so that you could still see the views and everything.
Yeah.
And they had birds crashing into it all the time. And so now they're looking at, I think, a film or something else to try to prevent that.
Yep. Yep.
So just,
We're going through those exact same conversations right now. So
oh yeah, that was terrible. It's like you try to do something good and you get this outcome you weren't expecting.
yeah, yeah. And I think that goes back to the point about it's an evolving, everything is evolving, right? So there's always the ability to either pivot or improve or modify or refine. I think that's part of our job, is being able to kind of adapt the best laid plans as we go along here.
Yep. The planning process is really what's so valuable, getting all that input and engagement, and then being able to turn it around and adapt is such an important thing.
That's right, 100%.
Well, I thank you so much, Adam, for coming today. I'd like to end with something positive, and I stole this from Amy Poehler's podcast, if you're familiar with that one at all. But at the end, she always likes to ask the guests, what are you doing now that makes you laugh, makes you relax, or what do you do to have fun?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a whole host of things. I like to think of myself as somebody that just loves to enjoy life. And I think that this time of year, especially in my world, my wife's birthday typically aligns pretty close to Thanksgiving, and so we're big on Thanksgiving and family time and getting everybody together, and and then that transitions into all the December holiday seasons and the enthusiasm that comes with that. So this time of year is a very happy time of year in my world. Personally, I love spending time with the family. I have an 11 and 13-year-old, a really best friend in the world kind of dog that I spend a lot of time with, and he doesn't care, how good or bad my day was.
Yep.
I enjoy, just going on walks with him and playing around. I love to get outdoors, golfing, that kind of stuff is also really enjoyable. But I think life and happiness is what you make it. So I'd get a lot of joy out of trying to take a step back and find the joy, And so
Yeah.
that's kind of what's got me going right now.
I love that. And you're in a great place to do that here in
Yeah.
Colorado.
Isn't that the truth? Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
Well, thank you so much, Adam. We appreciate you joining our podcast, and hope to talk to you again soon.
All right, Maureen. Thank you again for having me, and best of luck with the podcast.
Thank you.